Thank you for joining us. I think it'd be helpful to understand what you believe the aims of the Israeli government are with the conflict in Gaza at the moment. What are their stated aims, and to what extent the way in which they are perpetrating the conflict is likely to deliver those outcomes?
The most obvious direct answer is that the Israeli government was forced into action after October the 7th, 2023, with the horrific and brutal invasion of southern Israel by Palestinian terrorists who slaughtered, kidnapped, raped, tortured and kept prisoners.
All of which we've had a lot of evidence about, but in terms of what the aims of the government are in Gaza at this time, what do you believe those aims are?
As I was going to go on to say, I believe that the aims of the government are to react to that threat, which proved itself very formidable on that day, and also to try to achieve the return of the hostages. There are still 59 of them being kept in the Gaza Strip, which is a humanitarian issue that the whole international community ought to be uniting behind, but it's one that's had relatively little proper support. Indeed, I believe that the Israeli government and the Israeli military is engaging in a war not just on that front, but one which also has confronted the other threats, whether it has been Hezbollah in the north in Lebanon, or whether it has been the direct threat from Iran, which has rocketed the country twice, whether it has been from the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and whether it has been from elsewhere in the region. Israel has been, I believe, trying to reassert its military dominance in that region in order to protect itself against jihadi Islamic terrorism and forces which are dedicated towards the eradication of the State of Israel, and furthermore towards killing Jewish people both in the State of Israel and around the world, as explained by many of those forces, including the Iranians who are behind all of those proxies. So I believe that Israel is engaged in, and quite successfully so, reasserting its military abilities to hold at bay enemies on multiple fronts in order to try to keep the safety of the citizens of Israel, and also in order to provide a continued homeland for Jews who are at threat from rising anti-Semitism around the globe, who have a right to go and move to Israel in order to be protected from the kind of genocidal acts that took place both on that day and throughout the Jews' past.
It is perpetrating the conflict in Gaza, in terms of how Israel or the IDF or the government is carrying out the war in Gaza. How effective is it at delivering those outcomes? And if, as you've stated, the only outcome is a sense of security and the return of the prisoners,
hostages, not prisoners.
So, if that is the only endgame, then what is the endgame for the Palestinians? So there's two elements to that question. Is the way it's perpetrating the conflict at the moment conducive to achieving the release of the hostages? And actually, if hostages and security for Israel is the only desired outcome, what does, to use the chair's question, Israel look like in 10 years' time?
I'll try and answer that because I think it's a few questions rolled into one. So if you'll forgive me. The intended outcome for the Palestinians, you would have to ask them why they invaded Israel on that day, what their intended outcome was. But I think that the resulting outcome is that the proposition of some sort of negotiated settlement that would work more in their favour than is now the case has been pushed way into the long grass because of the horrific threats that actually manifested on that day. So I don't know what their objective aim was. I think it was to bring back the issue of Palestinian national self-determination because it had slipped off the world's radar because of the Abraham Accords, among other things, which had seen other Arab countries in the Middle East accepting that this intractable problem, due mostly to Palestinian rejectionism and maximalism, they had really sort of bypassed that following the Trump and Netanyahu agenda of trying to create a regional accord that would allow a Jewish state in Israel to thrive alongside Arab states.
We have heard evidence from the Palestinian side as well. I'm very keen to sort of understand in terms of what Israel is trying to achieve, and actually, whether or not the way the war is being carried out is a route to the return of the hostages, the safe return of the hostages, a route to safety and security for Israel, and a route to X what? What is the 10-year plan?
So I would say it's a mixed forecast on my part in terms of those issues. The main restriction, the main problem for the Israelis in carrying this out properly and effectively is indeed that there are people starving in Gaza, there are people being raped in Gaza and abused in Gaza. Those are the hostages that the Palestinian terrorists are keeping there. And they made a great show of how badly they've been treating them repeatedly through videos and those hideous performances they put on as part of the release part of the ceasefire agreement. Because of that, Israel has been rather held back from managing to engage in the war in a way that would be more decisive and quicker. And I also think that the previous US administration under Joe Biden also, whilst being very supportive of Israel's war effort, did at times throttle Israel's ability to carry out that war in a way that would have been more decisive. So I do think that you're right to point out that there may be some limitations on the way Israel's undertaking the war. I think the main reason for those limitations in order to achieve its main goals has been that it's restricted by some very, very difficult circumstances, most notably the hostages. Now, is it working to get the hostages back? I would say yes and no. Obviously, there is a demand among all people of good faith and goodwill around the world that the hostages ought to be released immediately without any preconditions. They ought to just be released, because you don't take hostages of civilians from their beds or from their homes and keep them for well over a year. This is just not something that is done. The world should be putting pressure on all of those state actors behind the Palestinian terrorists who are doing this, whether it's Qatar or Turkey or Iran, of course. So I think that there could be more support from the international community, including the UK government, in order to try to achieve that, so that Israel's abilities aren't really just restricted to how it can engage in this war. And I would say that it has been quite successful in that it's got back around 80% of the hostages. Now, there's a very big caveat. Some of them were dead and tortured and murdered. Some of them are still there. Some of those who are still there are also known to be dead. So it's not totally effective. But as I think is often the case in Israel's dilemmas and problems, you need to look at the circumstances which show that it's not offered a very beautiful solution that's going to be easy and a horrid one. It's offered two really horrid ones. And in this case, it's trying to conduct itself according to the rules of law, according to the rule of law, according to international human rights law, according to the rules of war, and according to the fact that it's a democratic country, a country that's had this vast hit to it of hostages and murdered and engaging in this ongoing war, which has been brutal on the nation. It has to try and find its way through those thickets. And that's why I think this committee's work is so important, because countries like ours, which are allies to democratic, liberal Israel, ought to be finding ways to support it in that fight in order to make it the least bad war it can be. But wars are horrible.
Can I just